Eddie Murphy finally confronts Diddy, reveals what about Diddy that haunts 17-year-old daughter. They didn't expect him to come through the side door, not Eddie Murphy, not on day 12 of the trial that had already shaken half of Hollywood's foundation. But there he was, suited, composed, and walking with quiet purpose. The room shifted. Jurors leaned forward. Reporters froze mid-sentence. Even the defense team momentarily lost its posture. Special Prosecutor Kash Patel stood as the court hushed. He addressed the judge with calm resolve. "Your Honor, the prosecution now calls Mr. Edward Regan Murphy to the stand." The murmurs stopped cold. Patel continued firm and direct. "This witness has remained silent for decades, but recent revelations, particularly those shared by Cassie Ventura, have brought forward not just corroboration, but consequence. His account will not only speak to what he endured, but what others still suffer in silence." The judge nodded. Eddie made his way to the stand. He took the oath. His hand didn't shake, his voice didn't crack. "I've been quiet for a long time," he began, "but silence stops being protection when it becomes complicity, and I can't let that silence bury my daughter." Gasps whispered across the gallery. Bella's name hadn't yet been mentioned in this trial, but now it was in the open. Eddie continued. "Back in 2006, I was living a professional renaissance. Films were greenlit. Studios wanted to work again. I was being courted like I was in my 20s. He paused, looked out at the jury not with charm but burden. Then I got the call. A big-name producer. Said there was a gathering. No schedule, just one of those exclusive nights where careers are shaped behind curtains. The house was in the hills. He described it simply: tall, quiet, gated, watched. No phones, no photos, no names. Just a single note handed to him as his phone was taken. Be who you really are. He walked through a home that looked like a museum but felt like a vault. The people inside weren't intoxicated. They were alert, controlled. Some smiled, some didn't. But they all had the same eyes, like someone was watching them. Then came Diddy. Smooth, charismatic, familiar. He walked me through the house like he was showing off a trophy. Not paintings, not space, but control. The kind that makes you feel like every inch you take is borrowed. At a large wooden door, Diddy paused, put a hand on Eddie's shoulder. "This is where the choices get made," he said. "You want to stay funny and broke, or you want to level up." Inside that room was a camera, not hidden, visible, positioned. People walked in with hesitation, walked out either elated or empty. It felt like a ritual without words, a transaction without a contract. Eddie declined to go in. He smiled politely, said he'd had too much to drink, asked for fresh air. He didn't stop me, but he didn't need to. The message was clear. This was my only invitation. He left. I didn't run. I walked like I still had control. But I knew I'd just shut a door most people never get to knock on. What followed wasn't immediate. It was slow. Meetings vanished. Scripts got lost. Directors who'd called him a genius now didn't return texts. It wasn't a blacklist. It was colder than that. No rejection, just silence. Eddie turned to the jury. I thought the silence was the price I paid for saying no. He looked toward the public gallery. But I was wrong. The silence wasn't the end of it. It was just the start. That's when he spoke about Bella. Born in 2008. Smart, quiet, talented. She'd always been drawn to performance, but Eddie never pushed. She found her own voice, and someone else heard it too. Last year she got a letter, white envelope, no return address, just a location in the hills, and an invite to a white party. She told her family it was networking. She came back different. Pam Bondi, now sitting quietly behind Bella in court, was the first to notice. She wasn't withdrawn, Pam would later testify. She was trained, like someone had coached her how to hide it. Bella didn't talk about that night until much later. Not until she saw Cassie Ventura take the stand. Not until she saw a grown woman cry on camera describing the very house she'd been to. That's when she finally came to me, told me everything. Eddie's voice didn't rise, but his jaw clenched. She was told to smile. Told if she said a word, something bad might happen. To me, to her brothers, to the family. The invitation wasn't a one-time thing. More letters came. Bella returned. Sometimes escorted by friends she didn't remember meeting. Each time the same place, the same pressure. They didn't lock her in. They locked her down with fear. Eddie produced the envelope from court files, its seal broken, its message simple. You're invited again. Be who you were meant to be. It was the same trap they tried to lay for me, he said. Only this time they came for my child. That day Monique was seated quietly in the back of the courtroom. She had once spoken up, once warned others. Now she was watching someone else finally be heard. Eddie paused. He looked around the courtroom at jurors, reporters, strangers. Then he said, I walked away from that house once, and I told myself that was strength. But if walking away lets them turn to the next generation, then silence isn't strength, it's surrender. He turned toward the defense table. Diddy hadn't looked up once. I didn't come here for revenge. I came here because my daughter is still living inside the echo of what they did to me. Cash Patel rose again. No further questions for now. The courtroom didn't applaud, didn't exhale, they just listened, as if something finally broke the air. The invitation came in silence. A white envelope, gold trim. No return address. Bella found it tucked in a gift bag after a charity event, one she had attended with a friend of a friend. She assumed it was just another industry dinner. They said it was a place where people my age could be seen, she would later recall. I thought it meant opportunity. It didn't. Eddie didn't read the invitation when Bella first showed him. She downplayed it. Called it casual, just a party. He trusted her. He shouldn't have. But how could he have known he thought the door had closed after he'd said no all those years ago? What he didn't understand, what no one did at first, was that the invitation wasn't random. It was planned, coordinated, targeted. It wasn't just about punishing me anymore, Eddie would later testify. It was about showing me that silence doesn't protect you. It just postpones the pain. Bella went to the gathering without telling anyone. She said she'd be staying over at a friend's, that she had a call back in the morning. Something small. Inside it looked like elegance. People dressed in white, music low, lighting soft. But under the surface it wasn't a party. It was a presentation. Everyone smiled, Bella said, but nobody looked at each other for too long, like they were waiting to be told what to do. She was 16. It was her first party, and it was Diddy who greeted her. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. You're Murphy's girl, he said, touching her shoulder lightly. Welcome home. Bella tried to smile, to play along, but something felt wrong, something she couldn't explain. It wasn't what I saw, it was what I didn't see. No laughter, no freedom, just pressure, like I'd walked into something that already decided what I'd be. She tried to leave early. That's when a woman near the entrance blocked her. No one leaves before the experience, she said, handing Bella a glass. You came here to learn. Bella didn't argue, she just nodded, because somewhere in her gut she already understood. This wasn't a night to negotiate. She returned home hours later, quiet, shaken. She never told Eddie, not the first time, not the second. Not until she saw Cassie take the stand on national television. A woman she'd never met, but one whose story mirrored hers, almost frame for frame. That's when I realized, maybe I wasn't crazy, maybe I wasn't alone. It was Pam Bondi who noticed first. Pam, a legal advocate with no political agenda left, had been following the case. Quietly, methodically. She had spoken to other young women, some anonymous, some missing. Bella wasn't the first. She wouldn't be the last. When Bella finally spoke, it wasn't dramatic, Pam told the court. It was terrified. like she didn't want to betray anyone, even the ones hurting her. Eddie was destroyed, not just by what had happened, but by how deeply Bella had hidden it to protect him. She told me they warned her, that if she said a word I'd lose everything again, that I might disappear, or worse, she would. At court, Kash Patel introduced the messages: voice notes, screenshots, cryptic texts from hidden numbers. Don't make noise, smile and show up. That's all we ask. You don't want to be the reason your father's past becomes his future. The jury didn't flinch, because they'd already seen the first fracture days earlier. Monique had spoken of similar threats of being sidelined after one refusal blackballed for choosing dignity over demands. They don't just erase your work, she'd said, they erase your voice. And when that stops working, they go after the ones who look like you. Bella looked like Eddie, too much perhaps. She was invited again. A second envelope, then a third. The lies changed: an award show mixer, a casting retreat, a fashion industry lounge. But the destination never did. The hills, the house, the silence. I wanted to stop, Bella admitted. But I was afraid. Not of what they'd do to me, but of what they'd say about me. That I was making it up, or worse, that I asked for it. Eddie found the final letter hidden in her drawer. He didn't confront her, not at first. He went to Pam, he went to Kash, and finally he went to court. Not for revenge, for protection. I didn't walk away from Hollywood, he said. I was pushed. But I let that push become a wall between me and the truth. And while I hid behind that wall, they found her. The courtroom didn't make a sound. Bella sat next to Pam, eyes wet, shoulders back, watching her father hold up pieces of her stolen years, envelopes, call logs, and one blurry photo of her seated on a couch, white-clad and alone, in a room of faces too polished to be safe. You didn't fail me, Bella would later say. You just didn't know. Now he did, and the world would too. By now the courtroom didn't just listen, it leaned. Every word Eddie Murphy spoke had weight, and people were finally ready to carry it. Special Prosecutor Kash Patel stood again, calm, steady. Your Honor, the next exhibits are not merely evidence, he said, they're patterns, and this witness has lived within them. Kash laid out a timeline, one that spanned years, a series of documents that looked like nothing but meant everything. Scripts abruptly canceled agents who suddenly couldn't get through meetings that never led anywhere. The silent engine behind the industry. Eddie described it plainly. You don't get a phone call that says you're finished. You just stop being returned. One missed meeting at that house and you start missing everything else. But the evidence was no longer just Eddie's. Cassie's testimony had already cracked the facade. Her courage created a ripple. When she spoke, Eddie said something and my daughter shifted. Because Bella had survived it too, but until Cassie, she thought she'd imagined it. Monique, seated in the gallery, met Eddie's glance from across the room. Years ago, she'd warned about the list, a shadow blacklist enforced by silence, not signatures. She'd lived it. She'd been called bitter, difficult, even delusional. Now her silence was a vindication. Pam Bondi handed Kash a small flash drive. He plugged it in. The room dimmed. A series of audio recordings played, some short, some clipped, some distorted by voice modulators. One came from Bella's second visit to the house. She's his. Let's see how deep that loyalty goes. She'll fall in line like the others. They always do. You want safety, then smile. That's the trade. One voice, clear, despite the murk, belonged to Diddy. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't threatening. He was smiling. That was the part that chilled the courtroom. It's not what they say, Eddie told the jury. It's how they make it normal. Kash stepped forward. Let the record reflect that this is not fiction. This is a designed ritual of control. More messages surfaced. Texts from anonymous numbers. Phrases like, "You're in now. No more no's. Your father knew better." Bella wasn't just targeted because she was young. She was targeted because she was his. The machine hadn't forgotten Eddie's refusal, and now it wanted to collect. Eddie turned to the judge. They didn't just punish me. They trained me to doubt myself. And when that didn't work, they found someone I couldn't afford to doubt. Cash then introduced a new witness, a studio insider, voice disguised, identity protected. They called it whitewashing, the voice said. Not the casting kind, the career kind. When someone resists, their presence gets washed out, quietly. According to the witness, entire roles were rewritten after someone declined a certain party. Entire campaigns paused after a single no. No one says it out loud, but everyone knows the rules. You show up once, you play along, or you never get invited again. One file detailed what insiders referred to as the circle, a group of powerful individuals whose approval meant success, and whose dismissal meant disappearance. Eddie pointed to the list. Diddy's name was there. So was a studio head, a media mogul, a celebrity philanthropist, and in handwritten notes, Bella's name recently added. It wasn't about her talent, it was about legacy. They weren't just trying to break her, Eddie said. They wanted her to inherit the silence I escaped. In the gallery, Monique gripped the edge of her seat. She had seen this happen too many times. This was why she fought so hard to be heard before others had to bleed to be believed. And Cassie, now sitting behind the prosecution, quietly wept as Bella looked back and gave her a nod. The wall had cracked, and through that fracture, the truth had started to leak. They always say the industry runs on talent, Eddie said, but talent doesn't scare them. Integrity does. Cash turned to the jury. This isn't just about a party. It's not about one man. It's about the system that protects men like him, and the ones who still haven't come forward. Eddie looked out across the room one final time that day. I didn't come here to resurrect my career. I came here because if I didn't speak, then everything I've taught my children about courage was a lie. The judge called recess. No one moved for a full 30 seconds. Then Bella stood. Pam Bondi rose beside her, and slowly, row by row, the courtroom stood in silence. The following morning, court resumed under gray skies. No cameras were allowed inside, but outside the press had already declared it the trial that cracked the silence. A silence built on whispers, favors, and fear. Now the courtroom had become a confessional. Eddie Murphy returned to the stand, not because he was subpoenaed, but because Bella asked him to finish what she started. I need you to say the things I still can't, she had whispered the night before. Because I'm still learning how to be free. He stepped up to the mic, slowly holding a small stack of papers. On top was a drawing crayon on folded paper. Bella's handwriting curved softly across the top. Things I couldn't say out loud. He handed it to the clerk, then looked directly at the jury. We teach our children to speak up, but we don't prepare them for what happens when they do. He paused, steady. I thought walking away from that house years ago was strength, but when I stayed silent, I left the door open. And they found her. Cash Patel took the floor again. His tone was sharper now, focused. Mr. Murphy, were you ever contacted directly or indirectly after your daughter's first visit? Yes, Eddie said quietly. Once, a phone call. No voice, just music, and then one line. He inhaled. They said, she smiles better than you did. The jury stiffened. Cassie, seated near the front, placed her hand over her heart. That same call had come to her once. Different words, same meaning. Cash introduced a new piece of evidence, a letter, unsent, found crumpled in Bella's trash can. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just titled, Why I Pretended. Inside, Bella had written in broken sentences, because I thought it would go away if I didn't resist. Because I didn't want him to hurt. Because I didn't know you could say no more than once. Eddie's voice dropped low. My daughter thought silence was safety, but silence is a leash. In the gallery, Monique wiped a tear. She knew that leash well. Years ago, she'd tried to pull it off her own neck and was shamed, dismissed, denied work. People called it difficult. Now, they were calling it true. Pam Bondi took the stand briefly at Cash's request. She spoke not as a lawyer, but as a witness to Bella's healing. She didn't walk in like a victim. She walked in like a survivor still bleeding. Pam detailed how Bella would flinch at certain tones, how she couldn't stand quiet rooms, how she once whispered in her sleep, "Don't let him see me cry." Back in the courtroom, Eddie opened the final envelope. One Diddy had sent directly to Bella. Inside was a card, white and gold like the rest. But this one wasn't an invitation. It was a warning. We gave you a chance to shine. Now it's your turn to return the favor. No threat, just expectation. That was the nature of the game. They don't always say, "Do this or else," Eddie explained. They say, "We're watching," and sometimes that's worse. Cash Patel took a moment before speaking. He faced the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't about party invitations. It's about power disguised as opportunity. It's about victims who were never supposed to be heard." He nodded toward Bella. "And now they are." A murmur spread across the gallery, not outrage, but reverence. A sense that something invisible had just been named. As the court adjourned for the day, Eddie stepped down from the stand. He didn't look at Diddy. He looked at Bella. She stood near the exit beside Pam Bondi, shoulders square, eyes, wet but unbroken. And in the back, Monique rose silently. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because what had once been her battle alone was now a movement. Court resumed to a different kind of silence. Not fear, not tension, reverence. By now the gallery was full before the doors opened. Reporters no longer shoved for angles. They sat quietly, pens down, listening for something that had taken decades to be spoken. The judge gave a nod. The day would begin with rebuttals. Cash Patel rose from his seat at the prosecution table and turned to the jury. "Before we close, you will hear the voices that helped maintain this silence, and the ones who now choose to break it." The defense team requested a brief sidebar. Then they shocked the courtroom. "Your Honor," one of Diddy's lawyers said flatly, "we waive our right to cross-examination." "No questions for Mr. Murphy or any of today's witnesses," the gallery murmured. Diddy sat still, eyes fixed on the table, jaw locked. It wasn't defiance. It was retreat. Cash Patel didn't flinch. He continued presenting. Today's evidence wasn't graphic. It wasn't loud. It was what the system feared most: pattern. Studio emails. Contract terminations without cause. Names flagged quietly on casting lists under the phrase, "not aligned." A former junior agent took the stand anonymously. Voice altered, face blurred. "There's no blacklist on paper," they said, "but we know who not to bring into meetings, who not to mention by name. You don't need a memo. The silence tells you." Bella's name had appeared on one of those lists. Not because of performance, not because of controversy, because she was related to someone who once said no. Eddie sat with hands folded, face unreadable. But when that list was shown, when he saw her name circled in red, his eyes finally closed. For just a moment. "They punished me for protecting her," he later said. "Then punished her for being mine." Next came another witness, a studio assistant, still young, still afraid. They described white events like coded invitations handed out without names, but with unspoken expectation. "You show up once, and if you play the part, you'll be fine. If not, you stop getting calls." Then came the voice everyone had been waiting for. Monique took the stand. No disguise, no fear, just truth. "I've been saying this for years," she said, "but back then they called me ungrateful, said I was crazy, difficult. Now they call it courage." She spoke not just for herself, but for everyone erased between headlines. We weren't forgotten, we were filtered out. As she finished, Cash Patel nodded solemnly. "Thank you for surviving long enough to be heard." Then he turned to the judge. "Your Honor, before we close, we ask to submit final correspondence between the defendant and Ms. Bella Murphy." Inside the packet transcripts of Diddy's direct messages, short, sharp, and deliberate. You want to work in this town, you start with trust. You have a legacy to protect. Don't waste it. If your father couldn't finish the climb, maybe you will. No threats. Just pressure. And in that pressure, a contract without a signature. Pam Bondi approached the bench quietly. She handed the court clerk a sealed folder. Inside were Bella's own photographs taken after each visit. Not by choice, by surveillance. She didn't know they existed until Pam showed them to her. She asked me one thing, Pam said softly. Don't let this happen to anyone else's daughter. The final statement came not from a lawyer, not even from Eddie. It came from a note taped anonymously to the courthouse wall that morning. No name, just handwriting. I said yes because I didn't think no was an option. I watched Eddie say no. I watched what it cost him. I thought silence would be safer. I was wrong. Signed, simply, one of many. The judge leaned forward. Closing arguments will begin tomorrow. Jurors are instructed to avoid all media until then. As the room emptied, a small gesture happened in the back row. Cassie Monique and Pam Bondi stood side by side as Bella walked past. No words, just a nod, just solidarity. And outside on the courthouse steps, the crowd had grown not louder, but larger. People weren't there to protest. They were there to witness, holding signs, not with slogans, but with names. Bella Monique Cassie, someone you know inside. Eddie remained seated after everyone left. A reporter approached slowly. Why now, she asked. He didn't smile, because silence used to feel like armor. Now it feels like a target. By the time court convened for closing statements, there were no empty seats in the gallery. Outside, the sidewalk was covered in paper signs, handwritten notes, and candles. People had stopped treating it like a trial. It had become a memorial for the silence, for the forgotten, for the erased. Inside the courtroom was tense, but not chaotic, just quiet, deliberate. Kash Patel stood once again, unflinching. He addressed the jury without flair. No raised voice, no performance. You've heard the stories, you've seen the patterns, but this isn't just about what was done, it's about who was allowed to do it, and for how long. He gestured to the evidence screens behind him. Pages of contracts, anonymous memos, lists that weren't labeled blacklist but functioned like one. They didn't silence people with threats. They did it with opportunity, with favors, with fear that wore a smile. He paused and looked at Bella. This young woman didn't just survive a system. She was born into it. Then he turned to the jury once more, and Mr. Murphy. He didn't testify because he wanted revenge. He came here because he refused to let the silence pass to the next generation. Diddy's lawyers declined to deliver a rebuttal. They simply rested their case. There was nothing more to say. The jury deliberated for several hours, long enough for the courthouse to become something else, a sanctuary of testimony. When the verdict came, it didn't come with cheers. It came with breath, held, then released. Guilty on multiple counts related to witness coercion, obstruction, and malicious manipulation of influence. The judge announced sentencing would follow in a separate hearing, but the moral outcome had already arrived. In the hallway, Pam Bondi held Bella's hand as reporters swarmed nearby. Monique gave no interviews. She didn't need to. The world already heard what it had refused to listen to for years. Cassie released a simple statement: we weren't wrong. We were early. Back in the courtroom, Eddie stayed behind once more. He sat at the same table where his silence used to weigh the most. Kash Patel walked over. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't say justice. He said, thank you for not waiting any longer. Outside, a journalist approached Bella. Do you feel safe now? They asked. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, I don't know. But I feel heard. And that's where it starts. Eddie stood at the top of the steps beside her. Reporters called his name. He didn't speak at first. Then he raised his voice, not to the microphones, but to the people watching. Hollywood didn't break me when it took my career. It broke me when I realized my silence let them take her voice. But not anymore. Not again. He placed one hand on Bella's shoulder. The door they used to trap us, we kicked it open. That afternoon, dozens of handwritten notes appeared in Echo Park again. Not accusations, not fear, stories. I was invited once. I said no. I thought that was the end. Now I know it was the beginning. They told me to pretend, but pretending made me sick. Thank you, Bella. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you for giving us permission to stop being quiet. A final letter was taped to a lamppost just outside the courthouse, signed like the first one of many. They wanted us to believe we were isolated, that we were weak, that we didn't matter. But it only took one person standing up for others to remember how to stand. Now we remember. Inside the courtroom, the judge removed his glasses and said what no one expected to hear from the bench. This wasn't just a case. This was a mirror. And it's time the industry decides what it wants to see in its reflection. The court was adjourned, but the reckoning was only beginning.